Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, good morning and welcome to the Swiss mission to the EU. I am Rita Adam, the head of this mission, and I'm very happy that you are joining us today for our Swiss breakfast. The Swiss breakfast is a format of events that we created a few years ago and that we use to discuss topics which are important here in Brussels. And topics also where Switzerland and the EU have common challenges, but also possibilities to work together to find solutions. And I think it's great that we open this year's series of Swiss Breakfasts in 2025 with this event dedicated to the topic of sustainable aviation fuels and what we can do to increase their production and their usage. I am particularly pleased to welcome our two speakers from the European Commission, Eddy Liégois and Ewa Oney. Oney, I hope I pronounced it correctly. And we have also a representative from the Swiss Federal Office of Civil Aviation, Mr. Marcel Kägi, over there. Flying remains central to our connectivity within Europe and beyond. However, if we fly more, we produce more emissions and thereby contribute to climate change. Reducing the carbon footprint of air travel is therefore an urgent necessity. The technologies for reducing aviation's carbon footprint exist. Sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF, are currently one of the most promising amongst them. Both Switzerland and the EU dedicate large funds to research and upscaling in SAF production. On the policy front, we are also moving ahead together. The new Swiss CO2 law entered into force on the 1st of January of this year foresees very similar targets and timeframes to the EU's for the introduction of SAF in civil aviation. In Switzerland, a few startups have done pioneering work in SAF production. They have developed internationally, investing in setting up production within the EU. Among them are leaders in the production of synthetic SAF, such as Climeworks, who uses CO2 captured from the atmosphere, or Metafuels and Synhelion, who employ green methanol and solar power respectively. Several challenges, however, lie ahead. These include ensuring enough supply, reducing the high prices of SAF, adapting infrastructure for its widespread deployment, and ensuring that the deployed SAF is truly sustainable. I am looking forward this morning to a lively discussion on how we can leverage synergies and share best practices to overcome these challenges and achieve our shared objectives. And before I conclude, when we talk about collaboration in the aviation sector, please allow me to add that Switzerland, with the support of the European Civil Aviation Conference, has recently announced its candidacy to the Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization for the period 25 to 28. And in the so-called ABIS group, this group includes several EU member states, namely Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Luxembourg, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Portugal. And we count on the support of our European partners for this election. And I'm very happy also to see that you started to eat, because that's also the point. It's not just food for thought, it's also Swiss delicacies. Enjoy it. And with this, I'm very happy to hand over to our moderator, Andrea Ostinelli. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dear Rita, ladies and gentlemen, dear friend of Switzerland, I'm really glad to be here in the Swiss mission to the European Union in Brussels to moderate this discussion with so many distinguished guests and with a so interested audience, both in present and from remote. Let me say, welcome on board. My name is Andrea Ostinelli. I'm a Swiss-Italian journalist working here in Brussels for the Swiss public broadcaster in Italian. I'm very happy to participate in this discussion, approaching such an interesting topic concerning our daily life in the next future, the sustainable fuels, the sustainable aviation fuels. We can consider these the fuels of the future because they are the most promising option to decarbonize aviation and fly without accelerating the climate change. To discuss this topic, we have three guests working daily at the very front line to make this aviation revolution possible. We have Eddy Liégois, head of the Aviation Policy Unit at the European Commission, DG Move. Bonjour, Eddy. Eddy is delivering us the introductory remark. Then we will discuss the topic, comparing the Swiss and the EU perspectives with Marcel Kägi, Grüße Marcel, Director of Aviation Policy and Strategy at the Swiss Federal Office of Civil Aviation, and with Ewa Oney. Good morning, Ewa. Team Leader Sustainable Aviation at the Aviation Policy Unit, European Commission, DG Move. We'll have some few questions for our panelists to set the frame, to recall some fundamental facts and figures on the reality of financing and of the production of sustainable aviation fuels in Europe and in Switzerland. And then we will open the discussion to the questions you may have. But first of all, Eddy, it's your turn. I'll give you the floor for your introductory remark. Please, Eddy.
Thank you very much, dear Ambassador. Many thanks for your invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. What best to start, I would say, the day with a good Swiss breakfast. In fact, I recognize quite a number of faces here in the room. Yes, that's very good to have this discussion because indeed sustainable transport is very important. And when dealing with aviation, we definitely need to work together simply because aviation is a global industry. So we need to find a solution globally. Greenhouse gas does not stop at the border, and beyond the question of greenhouse gas and sustainability, we have to keep in mind the competitiveness of the EU industry, of the European industry. So indeed, all solutions should be I would say implemented at a global level. So a good reason, let's say, to team up between the EU, Swiss, and also Norway. You know the agenda of the new Commission, where sustainability remains a very high priority. Some of you might say that yes, but when looking at the political guidelines, we saw more the word of industry competitiveness. And yes, indeed, that's probably a change compared to the previous Commission. We, let's say, we will try to combine the issues of sustainability with competitiveness with industry. We should indeed implement sustainability not against the industry, but with the industry. For aviation, that's indeed a big challenge. We know that aviation is a growing industry, and let's say, basically, in Commission, we support this approach, this trend. But on the other hand, it is also clear that aviation has to reduce its emission. I would say that for aviation, it's a matter of license to grow. I would say the objective to reduce the emission. And when I see a little bit the commitment of the EU industry, I'm quite impressed by the wish, the objective of the industry to decarbonize. You have probably heard this initiative of the industry, which is called Destination 2050, which put together the airport, the airlines, and also the manufacturers with a clear commitment to decarbonize the aviation industry by 2050. But then the question is how to decarbonize aviation. That's what we call hard to abate sectors. If you compare to road, even to maritime, the technological options to decarbonize are very limited compared, for example, to maritime. There is only very few limited fuels that can be used for aviation. And fuels are very important. That was a little bit an outcome of this discussion we had under the Destination 2050 with the industry. In fact, fuels would represent more than 50% of the effort to be done to decarbonize aviation. 25% would come from technological progress, so progress, for example, for new engines, for the aerodynamic of aircraft. So fuels are definitely very important, unavoidable if we want to decarbonize aviation. So you know that for that we have set in place a legal framework which is called the Refuel EU Aviation, which was adopted in 2023, with a clear mandate for the fuel supplier to develop and to implement fuels, SAF, for the market, 2% in 2025, 6% in 2030, and then it's growing to 20% in 2035. But the big challenge is not so much the SAF, but the challenge is what we call the SAF, synthetic fuels, because we all know that biofuels, even advanced biofuels, are limited. So, for example, the recycling of waste is not unlimited. So we have to develop these synthetic fuels which have no biological origin. The target for 2030 is not very high, only 0.5%, but the problem is that so far there is no SAF which is available. The problem is the price of eSAF, which is currently more or less 6 or 8 times the price of conventional fuels. So we have on the one hand the fuel suppliers which are basically ready to produce SAF, eSAF, but which wants to have, let's say, a certainty that the airlines will buy this SAF for a long period. They would like to have offtake agreement for at least 10 years and based on a clear price. On the other hand, we have the airlines which, let's say, hesitate to commit for so long-term offtake agreement. Airlines usually have contracts with a fuel supplier of 1 or 2 years. So that's the reason why there is a clear need for public intervention. That's what was announced by the Commission in the Clean Industrial Deal, and based on the Clean Industrial Deal, we are working now, and that will be the subject of the discussion, on a steep sustainable transport investment plan, which will be presented in Q3 of this year, which will, let's say, present an industrial strategy, first of all, to support a fuel supplier to build a new plant for the production of eSAF, and which will also present a mechanism to bridge I would say the gap between the suppliers and the airlines with a system, without going in details, of what we call double auctioning. So basically we would ask the fuel supplier, what could be your best offer for the production of SAF? And then we would also ask on the other hand to the airlines, what are you ready to, I would say, to offer in terms of demand for eSAF? There will be a gap between the two, and for that we would need a mechanism and EU funding to bridge this gap. So that's where we are. Again, very important that we cooperate beyond the EU for us, and it will be part of the steep partnership will be very important. First of all, for the production of SAF and eSAF outside the EU, so imports will be very important, but it is also important to build such a partnership to mobilize the funds which will be necessary for the uptake of eSAF. So these are the few words that I wanted to share with you this morning. So back to you, the moderator.
Thank you very much, Eddy, for your introduction. And now is the moment to let the discussion take off with our two panelists. So I can say we have understood that both Switzerland and the European Union are committed to build a net zero economy by 2050, and in order to reach this goal, the aviation industry has a very significant role to play. To decarbonize aviation, it's vital to change the way aircraft engines are fueled, switching from kerosene, so from fossil, to sustainable aviation fuels, meaning biogenic and, we have heard, synthetic fuels. Eddy has spoken about the EU regulation in this field, Refuel EU, which establishes that a 2% share of sustainable aviation fuels must be provided at the EU-level airports from this year, and this share must grow to 70% in all EU airports from 2050. So my question for both our guests is, are both EU and Switzerland on track to reach these ambitious goals? And in practical, what are both doing to ensure this revolution in the aviation industry in order to do that this revolution may happen on time? Who want to start? Maybe Ewa, please.
I can go ahead, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the invitation. And yes, so in the EU we have this ambitious target of climate neutrality by 2050, where to reach this high ambition, all sectors will need to contribute. And our contribution comes with Refuel EU, as Eddy explained in the introduction. Here is important that so all sectors, all modes of transport, from the transport overall, we need to reduce 90% of emissions until 2050, but important to keep in mind not all sectors will contribute proportionally. So some will be faster, some will come later. And that's why with Refuel EU we came with this ramp-up approach. As you said, we start with 2%. It's achievable, it's feasible, it's a modest start, and then we are increasing up to 20% in 2035, and then we go up to 70% in 2050. But here what is important is that we really implement in the early days and we stay on track, because then when the steep ramp-up will come, we will need to ramp up very quickly, so there is no time to delay. The feedback we are getting from the measures we put in place are very positive, and we see the effect that the investment, we see many projects in the pipeline that it triggered the investment, so this is very good. In terms of the capacities which are already in place and the capacities which are already planned, we are very well with the biofuels, so the biosaf, we are very well on track with our targets for the next decade, so until 2034. And as Eddy explained, where more work needs to be done is the eSAF, so it's the SAF which is produced from hydrogen, from renewable or low carbon electricity. So here we will be working how to support development. We will work on the STEAM, which was announced in the third quarter. Maybe also just to add, because you also asked what we are doing. So the STEAM is coming, but as well, and we also talk about the regulation, but we have also a lot of measures in support of the regulation. So for example, alliance, for example, SAF allowances, which I can later on elaborate more.
Okay, thank you so much, Eva. Marcel, from the Swiss point of view?
Thank you very much, and thank you especially to my colleagues from the European Commission for taking the time to talk with us about this important topic, and thanks to the permanent representation and Thomas and his team for inviting us and organizing this. So from our side, as the ambassador said, our goals are fully aligned with the goals that Ewa just summarized that apply to the EU. The Swiss population last year voted with a considerable majority on a law enshrining the 2050 net zero goal, also containing international civil aviation. So we have a high pressure but also legitimization to act on this topic. Therefore, we have decided, or our parliament has decided, to adopt refuel, so the same goals, the same blending mandate, this ramp up also applies to Switzerland, and we will also have a funding mechanism about which I can maybe say a bit more later. You asked, Andrea, about whether we think it's realistic to reach the goals by 2030. So we get the same signals back from Swiss stakeholders, but also internationally, that implementing this 2% target until 2030 should be not a problem. However, when we come to 2030, especially for the sub-quota for eSAF or synthetic SAF, there we need to see rather soon some final investment decisions to have the necessary capabilities online so we can meet that quota as well. And therefore, in this funding mechanism I mentioned, we will focus especially on that technology.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Go forward with another question, speaking more about maybe figures. And so this question is for you, mainly Ewa. I would like to know how much capital is needed, according to your estimate, to create and scale up a European SAF industry able to meet the needs of the internal aviation industry. And in this, I would like also to know how much public funding is already mobilized in the EU and its member states, and how difficult it's to raise private capitals for investment in the sustainable aviation fuels industry.
Yes, so we are now going to the essence of the problem, the money, and how do we finance it. So just to give the scale of the needs which are required, so our targets, when we translate our targets to actually investments on the ground, we see that we need much more than 100 new SAF plants. And when we look at the how much is the cost, of course it depends on the type of technology, but we are speaking here at least €500 million investment, and when we talk about the eSAF, it's at least 1 billion, 2 billion euros of an investment. So if we multiply both, we already get the magnitude that it's a lot. Of course, in this transition, the main investment will have to come from the private sector, and the good news is that what we hear, money is there. What is the challenge is how do we share the risks, and of course everyone who invests, they have expectations of the return, and that certain money return, but as well that the investment will be successful, will be sustainable. So the role from us as a regulator, as a public authority, we need to ensure we have the relevant, stable framework. So here we hear, please keep the targets, keep the level of emissions. It is feasible. We believe it is feasible, it's reachable, and we want to keep this stable. We also have now all the rules related with sustainability. So that's here. We also hear, please keep the stability there. And what we also hear is support the early movers. And how do we share the risk? And here is the role of the guarantees. Here is the role of different instruments that Eddy referred to. So this is an area that we will be looking. In terms of what support has been done, so when we add up, we actually have recently published a report on the SAF, it's called SAF flexibility mechanism, and there we provide a bit of information how much investment from the public money was spent. And when we add the Horizon Europe Innovation Fund and InvestEU, there is around €1 billion support. We have now the support coming also from SAF allowances. So this is when airline is purchasing SAF, they can receive some co-financing to compensate for the price of SAF. So there we estimate it will be around 1.6 billion. However, what we are now looking and investigating how to use those different instruments that we currently have, how to use them more targeted, how to be more cost efficient, because the money is scarce. Public money always will be scarce. So how can we also support now these early movers in eSAF to overcome this challenge with the eSAF, and as well how we can make the cake bigger by avoiding this fragmentation that we have, that EU envelope and then every country has its envelope, but try to use existing instruments to increase the cake size. We have, for example, under Innovation Fund, there is a mechanism which calls auctions as a service, which allows member states to top up money. We also have a mechanism, H2 Global, which also allows to organize double auctions. So there are already mechanisms. And maybe last point as well to stress that we have also the sense of urgency. When we look at the target 2030, it's actually tomorrow, because building a plant is at least 3 years. And we have, despite many projects in pipeline, none of them have reached final investment decision, so that the board approves and say, yes, let's go ahead with this project. And only then when they say yes, then the construction starts, permission starts. So it's a long process. So if we do retro planning, we need to start today, and there is very good analysis on this, of the Sky Power project, which very much looks, so I do a bit of advertisement to also look there.
I understand, and well, so we can say that building up a safe SAF industry requires the support of the state. Refuel EU, we have seen, foresees a number of measures that should support the sustainable aviation fuels industry in these initial phases. Can you elaborate a bit more? Can you say about these support measures? Maybe let's share with us some experiences in the EU and also in Switzerland with the support for the production of sustainable aviation fuels. Tell us which measures work the better, which works maybe less. I don't know. Eva, first to you, and then we go to Marcel.
So I can elaborate a little bit more because as well in introduction, Eddy has mentioned so the main area of intervention we see is this early movers investments, and for them it's they have this early movers disadvantage because first the technology is tested, is there, but putting all the technologies together, what the outcome you have there is also uncertainty of the efficiency, and so there is this remaining technology risk related with the construction. You also have a risk related betting on which technologies, the ISAB, there can be the various pathways, new pathways are coming as well. So as well you can have the technology betting on the technology, and also this price related uncertainty, what Eddy explained about this. To invest, I need a 10 years certainty perspective for the bank that they want to know that the cash flows are coming, but the off-takers, be it airlines or fuel suppliers, for them, they will not like to lock into 10 years fixed price because the price maybe will go down. So we have this price uncertainty. So that's why how we are looking at two strengths. One is how to support the construction of new plants, maybe some performance guarantees working with the EIB, European Investment Bank, what type of guarantees are missing on the market to support the construction itself, but as well on the other side looking at the price support. So here it comes those different quite complicated, simple but complicated to explain this like double auctions where you can help with this price bridging.
I see. No, I think it was useful to elaborate a bit more. Marcel, from the Swiss point of view.
Yeah, thank you very much, and it is reassuring to hear that we are trying to solve very similar problems. So I mentioned briefly that Switzerland has decided to adopt refuel with the blending mandate. It has also, the Parliament has also decided to earmark the resources that will be generated from auctioning ETS certificates, as well as the potential fines on the refuel, to earmark or bind these resources for projects with the goal of scaling up SAF. So we anticipate, depending on the CO2 price, a pool of around 400 million euros until 2030, which we can use, or we are required to use for mainly for SAF projects. And we are now in the process of figuring out how to best do this. We think we need to make sure that we don't just give away that money, but that we do this in a way that sends credible signals to the private capital market that this area is something that's worthwhile to invest in. How do we plan to do this? We make sure that we always employ blended financing, so we never fully cover a project, and we want to make sure that the state also puts some skin in the game. This we can do, for example, by financial mechanisms based on loans or state guarantees for bank loans, with the idea that not all the projects we support can fail, because then we will have a problem, and therefore our involvement in these projects is more credible to the private sector. So this is something that we are working on and that we are considering. Talking with banks, private equity organizations, as well as companies developing SAF productions, we have learned that it is very challenging at the moment to finance a project development phase, so permitting, all the engineering work that has to be done before an FID, a final investment decision, can be taken. So we are looking at models to support this phase. There As I mentioned, we are mostly looking at guaranteeing or backing up bank loans that will fund such a phase. And then, as Ewa already mentioned, and also Eddy in his introduction, we need to look at what needs to be done to make sure that during the production phase, the amortization of such a plant is usually long, more than 10 years, that you have a pricing certainty based on which you can then go into offtake contracts. And there we are especially looking at collaboration with other funding instruments, such as the ones you described in the European Union, because especially post-FID, the amount of money that's needed to send a meaningful signal is beyond what we have at our disposal. So we are really looking at a convergence, at compatibility with regard to eligibility criteria, and to collaborate with other jurisdictions in order to maximize the impact that this support program can have. And maybe one last point, which is a bit special with regard to Switzerland. Obviously, the green transition in aviation is also an economic opportunity. I think I worked a lot with ICAO, and there many states say we want to use these economic opportunities that SAF production brings, especially for developing countries. This is really an opportunity. However, from a Swiss point of view, this is much less interesting for us. What we care about is the indirect effects that aviation brings, that the connectivity brings. And we can only maintain that connectivity if we stay on a credible path towards net zero. So everything we will do in this green transition and SAF funding, all these things, will have to go to reducing emissions. We will not specifically look at value creation in Switzerland. So we can easily also fund projects in other countries. I think most projects will be funded in other countries than Switzerland. And we have rather limited value creation criteria. So you can use some Swiss IP, a Swiss stakeholder might hold some equity in the undertaking, but by no means does the project have to take place in Switzerland.
I see. Marcel, I would stay with you because I would like to know, maintaining a focus on Switzerland, in which phases of the SAF production cycle can Switzerland play a role and maybe have a competitive edge compared to other countries?
I think the ambassador mentioned it briefly in her introductory speech. Switzerland invests, I think, considerable months into basic research with our Federal Institutes of Technology, where we have some promising IP being generated. Maybe you've heard of Synhelion or Climeworks, that are key technologies, I think, for eSAF production. And however, also being Swiss, we're also a little bit self-critical always, and we are not so good in, I think, commercializing this research. So usually this then takes place elsewhere. We Swiss even take pride in saying that our industrial policy is that we have none. So I think we can bring a lot of basic research to the table. First, market applications. I think we have a lot of experience in commercializing this technology that will then take place or take into account the international dimension of all value chains. I think especially here it doesn't make sense, as I said, to produce that in Switzerland. Another area I think where we can bring something to the table is in financing. We have a lot of experience in green finance. We also have a very dynamic private equity sector that is already quite active in financing SAF projects. And I think, as I said before, in terms of public policy, I'll also use the opportunity to do some advertisement, is that we have this really clearly at the legal level earmarked funds that go into SAF production, so they are not in competition with fiscal goals. So the likelihood that there will be a political decisions that we take the revenue that's generated from the ETS to balance our federal budget, this likelihood is very, very low. So you can, with a high degree of certainty, anticipate that we will use this money for SAF scale-up.
Thank you so much. And now, two last questions to Ewa and Marcel in order to conclude this first row of questions, and then we will open the discussion to you, to the audience. I would say to open the perspective, that fossil fuels are trendy again on the other side of the Atlantic. So my question, very simply, is does this make it more difficult to finance and scale up the sustainable aviation fuels industry in Europe and in Switzerland? Or on the contrary, does this make Europe and Switzerland the right place to invest in SAF? And I also would like to have an overview on the other economic superpowers like China and India. Are they investing as well in the SAF industry? I don't know, perhaps we start with you, Ewa.
Okay, maybe just a general remark on the fossil fuels that we will still have quite important share of fossil fuels. So with 2% SAF, then you have remaining 98 is a fossils, and when we look towards 2050, we still have a 30% there. So so still the fossil component, yes. So we will stay, but we need to invest and develop SAF. From aviation point of view, it is a global sector, operates globally. Level playing field is very important. So moving the ambition on SAF globally is very important. And we very much welcome the positive outcome of the ICAO work on it was the CAF conference, so the conference on aviation and alternative fuels, which happened end of 2023. And there was an agreement, so the global framework with the different pillars, how we can promote SAF was adopted. And one of these features is an agreement on aspirational aim to have aspirational goal of 5% CO2 reduction from fuels by 2030, which is very comparable level of ambition what we have in refuel. So it is very positive, as Marcel said. When we see in ICAO, there is a lot of no region wants to be left behind the SAF transition. They see it very much as an economic opportunity to bring new jobs, to develop new economy, to bring innovation. It also helps you with the diversification of your energy, which for like African countries is also important for the trade balance, so they can reduce the imports of oil. So it has ticks, so the SAF can tick many boxes. So that's why we also see a lot of momentum, and the countries that you mentioned, China, India, they are investing. We also have Brazil, we have policies developed by Japan, Singapore. There are many countries which are developing their policies. Also in Africa, they are very much, for example, Cote d'Ivoire is looking seriously, South Africa, Kenya. So many jurisdictions are investing. So I'm optimist here because of this multi and different opportunities of SAF. There is the momentum, and Europe is leading the momentum, and we should now demonstrate, we successfully implement the policies to give the example.
Thank you. Marcel, do you share this optimism?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you very much, Ewa, for pointing that out. I think it's easy to say now with changes at political level, the fossil energy sources are back, but I have exactly the same observation, or I make the same observation that Ewa pointed out, because the ambassador mentioned that Switzerland is currently starting a campaign to be elected into the Council of ICAO, and in that work I have the privilege to have quite some interactions with civil aviation authorities in states outside of Europe, because we obviously want them to vote for us. And there what I hear is, first, this is seen as an opportunity because it will diversify the value chain of the whole fuel production ecosystem. And secondly, this will translate into policy. Ewa, you mentioned a few countries that already have a policy. I recently had a conversation with some East African states. They are looking at introducing a blending mandate also in the Gulf region. There is discussions about it. And I have had lots of interactions with the APAC region at an event where that was dedicated to negotiating air services agreements last fall, and also there the number one topic was not liberalizing air services agreements, but they wanted to know what's going on with refuel in Europe and what they should do and what the eligibility criteria of fuels are, because first and foremost they see that they need to deliver because they committed to it at ICAO level. And secondly, they see the EU market as a credible market to sell, especially in an early phase SAF to, because we have that demand certainty thanks to refuel. So there I'm pretty optimistic that the signal that Europe managed to send there are really credible also beyond Europe. Then just last week I had the pleasure to attend an event organized by the World Economic Forum where I would say half the participants were from the US. And obviously I asked them the same question as you're asking me now. So what's going on with regard to SAF? And what I've heard is that in terms of market development, there is still a huge voluntary market for especially companies wishing to reduce their Scope 3 emissions. And there is capital around to scale up SAF production in the US for a US market. And in addition, that some of the subsidies don't seem to go away. So there seems to be also some consistency with regard to projects that especially the Department for Energy or of Energy has funded that these projects still exist.
Thank you so much. So now it's first of all, thank you to Eddy, Ewa, and Marcel for this overview. And now I would like to open the discussion to the people here in the audience and to those following from remote. We already have some questions. For the ones present here, please raise your hand to signal your interest in having the floor. And once you get the microphone here in the room, please introduce yourself by name, surname, and organization. And I see that there are already people from remote. They can complete the form online, and I read their questions. So go straight forward to the point with your questions in order to allow everybody to enter the discussion. Please, who wants to start the discussion here? Yes, sir. Then. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm Stefano Spinaci from the European Parliamentary Research Service. Thanks. I've learned a few things this morning. I'm not an expert in the sector, so what I'm going to ask maybe is not appropriate. But the second disclaimer is that from what I learned, I'm in favor of SAF as everything where Europe can be a pioneer. My two questions are, among the tools, is possible to consider also contract for difference, or they are not, fit for the purpose? And the second question, and here I can say a fake news, some air company, if I'm not wrong, they are complaining about ETS, things like that, because then you can fly from European Union, let's say, to Asia, directly, you pay all the ETS, or you fly to Istanbul and then you take another flight and there don't pay ETS. What about the case of SAF? We can have a similar case, or it's out of the possibilities?
Who wants to answer first?
You want to start? Yeah, maybe I can say something about the contract for difference, and probably it's more appropriate if you cover the carbon border adjustment stuff. So with regard to contract for differences, I think, and I'm also not an expert on finance, but the way I understand it is that a double-sided auction, I think that was mentioned a few times now, that's also in the Sky Power project and in other projects, I think is very promising with regard to reaching the goal that the contract for differences policy tries to reach, which is to create pricing certainty over the time a production plant delivers a product. So it can be done with this double-sided auction, where you know to what price, where an off-taker knows what price he or she needs to pay to buy the SAF, and the producer knows how much each liter will generate in terms of revenue. This could also be done with the contract for difference. This is an approach I think that the US has employed so far. With regard to the Swiss funding instrument that we are building up, we would be able to use both mechanisms, double-sided auctions as well as conditional grants in the form of contract for differences.
Eva.
Yes, so, well, from the the tools like EU ETS, it helps actually to increase the uptake of SAF. You need to pay carbon price for the fossils, but the SAF will not be. Then we also have the recycling of those revenues coming to support through the SAF allowances. So those instruments are examples of the support measures which help us to bring us closer to the ambitions. Indeed, they are with the increasing carbon price and with the SAF mandates. If Europe goes alone and other jurisdictions don't have a matching level of ambition, there are concerns. There can be traffic leakage, hub leakage, different type of leakages. And this is the area we are now studying. So we are conducting a study where we are looking at different, we take concrete examples and we are analyzing how this extent of the problem how relevant the issue is. And there we will look also at possible mitigating measures. We look at one of the measures, we look at this carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is designed in the view of the goods. So we are looking relevance of this, but also any other type of levies that can also be reinvested in the sector. So we are in the early stage of this analysis. It's also part of the review of RefuelEU, where Commission is asked to come with the report in 2027. So we will fit to this reflection.
Thank you, Eva. Do we have any other questions here? Yes, please. The sir on my right. And then after this, we will move to some questions online. Please.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the Swiss House in front of the Commission to organize this event, and to the speakers and the moderator. Yes, just 2 comments. I think it's important that people that we are in this world of sector of aviation, we have to recognize the story of SAF is the story of, let's say, the reality of power in the world. I mean, we have done, and I'm very happy to tell the truth, to fix, you airlines have to use SAF, but we have not been able to say, you oil producers, you have to produce SAF, you like it or not. And this is reality. That is what we are dealing with. The airlines were telling us it's going to be 6 times more the price. And we have said, as European, thanks to the Commission and the Parliament, you do it. It doesn't matter. But we have not have the power to tell the oil producers, so the big players, you have to do it. This is one point. But I think it's important to, from time to time, to remember what we are dealing and what is the reason we are dealing in such a way with this situation. And the second one is, I think the issue of the SAF brings to the idea that, especially in Europe, we have to try to start to think about to limit, and I will explain the issue of the limit, the growth of aviation. Not by legislation, but we have to support more the train system. Because like that, people will use more the train, less the plane, less need of SAF. In general, less need of oil. And I think we have, this is the indirect way, and we have other way is like to limit, like they have done in France, in some big countries by geography, Spain, Germany, maybe Italy, to limit the capacity. A lot of people, how many kilometers? A lot of people say, well, you cannot do that. I cannot go with my car in some areas of my city. And I cannot go at the speed I want. So, similar. Thank you.
Sir, I didn't get your name and organization.
Sergio Alegre, Director General of Operations Council.
Thank you so much. Your reaction, please?
I can take the second one, because this discussion, train versus air, I think that's quite... Yeah. So in our mobility strategy, we stress that all modes of transport are needed, and we need to focus on how we can develop multimodality, how we can increase the choice for the consumers and let the consumer decide. the measures we put as well, they will increase, the sustainability measures, they will have an impact on the cost. So we talk about the question which was about the ETS, the SAF mandates. Eventually, yes, we hope the SAF and kerosene will be will be compatible, but it will take time for the transition. So this will also have some impact in terms of the demand, but this is our policies are very much based how we can develop each mode of transport and how we can offer the best service to the citizens.
Thank you. Marcel, your take?
Maybe just a word on the trains. We Swiss, we love our trains, right? Like I think the average share of like each Swiss citizen or person pays around 450 euros for the train infrastructure, which is huge compared to other, like 3 times as much as Germany, for example. So we like trains, obviously. However, if we look at, I just know the emission structure in Switzerland, the vast majority of emissions are long-haul flights. So I agree, this would be great if people would use more trains, but long-haul flights, we need to look at this because you can't replace them by trains. And also the demand for those is fairly inelastic. What we see now, it doesn't really depend how much the price is. People still want to fly. So I have limited hope that the price increase that the blending mandate, especially in the beginning, will bring, will decrease the demand. And in this context, I think we need to stay realistic and look at technological solutions to decarbonize aviation without saying, like, obviously try this, but if it doesn't work, we need to get our act together and really decarbonize also aviation in itself.
Thank you, Marcel. Eddy, do you want to add something?
Perhaps complement on your first question, because you say that we should oblige the fuel supplier to produce SAF, to produce e-SAF. Here we have discussed a lot how we can help for the uptake of e-SAF, let's say, to fill in a gap, let's say, I would say address a problem of market failure. But we should not forget that we are working on a very, let's say, solid basis, which is the 2023 Refuel Aviation Regulation, which precisely is a mandate, an obligation on fuel supplier. If you deliver fuel supplies in EU airports, then they are obliged by the dates which are set in the regulation to provide to fuel SAF and e-SAF in 2030. And it's a very strong obligation, and there are even penalties. Member states will be obliged to set a penalties scheme which will apply to them if they do not comply with their obligation. And okay, what we are discussing here is just a little bit the top of the iceberg, but there is a lot of work, including setting up a union database which will include all these fuel suppliers to see if they will meet their obligation. And that's very important. So we have to help the market. That's what we are discussing now with whatever contracts for difference or double auctioning, but the obligation is there. And if you follow a little bit the reaction of the market, fuel supplier try to test a little bit the Commission to see if, precisely as part of the review of the refuel in 2027, whether we might amend the mandate to soften it, and we have put a very clear message that we do not intend to change the mandate. At least there is a legal certainty on that, on the objective, on the target. We will really remain with these targets, and if they do not comply with the obligation, there will be penalties. There will be very strong penalties. But on the other hand, we are not here just to set legislation. Okay, you have to do that, and that's it. Here we observe that there is a real problem for the production of e-SAF, and that there is a need for public intervention, both in terms of having a mechanism, let's say, to fill in the gap, and I would say a mechanism which should go together with some public funding.
Thank you, Eddy. We have a lot of questions also from remote, so I would like perhaps to reach us to 2 questions. one for each, I think, and then if we have more time, we will go forward, but we have just 10 minutes to end this amazing Swiss breakfast. So the first question is a quite technical one to me, but let's see our guests maybe elaborate certainly. Elizabeth Harding is asking, what role do you see for carbon dioxide removals, CDR, in the aviation sector, which will need to neutralize emissions with permanent CDR, including residual emissions from SAF? This is one question, and then I would like to. A second question is for you, Eva. Is the Commission considering to introduce a revenue-centered mechanism at the EU level, for instance, with double-sided auctions funded with EU money, as proposed by Project Sky Power? And what are the thoughts on these proposals? Many thanks from Josef Janssen.
It's a bit unfair. I think I have the harder question. But obviously thank you very much for the question. I think it's absolutely it's of paramount importance, because all decarbonization strategies for aviation use this basket of measures approach that ICAO uses, where SAF plays a huge role, but also other measures. And then there's always a residual amount of emissions left. Operationally, but also if you look at the life cycle emissions of SAF production, very, very few production paths get you above 95% emission reduction. So you always have a role for direct air capture, CO2 removal from the atmosphere. So certainly there is a need for that. That's what we see. We also envisage funding, applied research there with our funding instrument, maybe not as a first priority, but it's something we look into. Switzerland also has a strategy on that subject that goes obviously beyond aviation. And I think what's important there is to consider that the technology needs to develop not only for taking care of the residual emissions, but also as a potential CO2 source for synthetic production paths, because there you need CO2. At the moment, it looks that a biogenic source of CO2, the ambassador mentioned it in the beginning, it looks more promising, but in the long term, this will become more scarce. So we need to look at this technology, absolutely.
Thanks. Eva?
Yes, so the question is on whether we look at the revenue certainty. I think we also, in the previous discussions, we quite extensively were saying that this is an area we are now focusing as part of the STEEP, so the Sustainable Transport Investment Plan, which was announced as part of the Clean Industrial Deal to come in third quarter. This one is a policy communication, but there, of course, we will come with different actions. And so definitely this is something we are looking at, and we invite also the industry stakeholders, the member states for the dialogue and to see how we can work together, how those things could work, how we can build on the existing instruments. As well, there is discussion because we need to have solution in short term, but as well in the long term. And long term, the Commission is coming with the next MFF. Commission has also announced to build on the experience of Hydrogen Bank to come with the Industrial Decarbonization Bank. So there are a lot of developments also coming. So we will also need to see how it fits in the more broader Commission work also for other sectors.
Okay. I have one more question. From regular, no, so regular I have already read. So two more questions. What role do you see for carbon dioxide removals in the aviation sector? No, this already read. Sorry, it is moving. Excuse me. I have to take some time to elaborate myself. Sorry. So I take this one. How will the EU and Switzerland ensure the scope of the refuel does not impact competitiveness of EU-Swiss airlines? Airlines with hubs outside of Europe, I think in part was the topic, will only be partly subject to SAF quota and can thus offer cheaper flights. This was, I think, the meaning of the previous question. if you can compliment a little, I see that it is a very sensitive topic. And I was looking for a question, and then a question for the Swiss government. So for you, Marcel, how can the Swiss government better support the pilot and demonstration projects in the refuel.ch Sweet project, which target e-SAF development within and outside Switzerland? They seem to be having a money problem there. So, first you,
Yeah.
and then Marcel.
Yes, because of course the competitiveness and Eddy actually started decarbonization and competitiveness, so reconciling both hand in hands, and that's also when you read the Clean Industrial Deal, it's the main focus now. So yes, I explained the study that we are doing now, but as well we have the measures, which is the SAF allowances to airlines for uptake of SAF. Exactly, the purpose of it is in the transition, given that there is a high cost gap, so biofuels. The minimum cost difference is between 2 and 3 times more expensive than fossils. When we look at the estimations for SAF, because the fuel is not yet produced, so it's all estimations, but there we see it's up to 8 times more. So here is the role of the SAF allowances until this gap remains so high, to help with transition to airlines. In the long term, we see the price will decline with the increase of the economies of scales and basically maturing of the technology. But we are reviewing. There are also annual report of EASA, so that's also very interesting to look. End of last year, EASA published report on the SAF market, so there you can see also by country what are the SAF projects. It's very interesting publication, and as well it looks at the prices. This will be every autumn. This report will be published.
Thank you. So, Marcel, you on the support from the Swiss government for the pilot and demonstration projects.
Maybe I take the liberty to also say something on the first question, because I fully understand this urgency or this need of airlines that operate globally to be able to compete with hubs that are close to the borders of the EU, Turkey or Middle Eastern airlines, that will not be subject, at least for some flight, to comply with the refuel mandate. And we try from a Swiss perspective to do as much as possible to level the playing field, to make sure that the airlines operating from Switzerland have that the competition conditions are as similar as possible to their competitors. I think we achieve that by adopting refuel, by using the money that comes from the ETS or from the sanctions for SAF scale up to lower the prices, by really engaging in ICAO, in CAPE, in the CAF3 process to get the global ambition up to as close as possible to what we have here in Europe as a policy. But it's clear that this will only bring you so far. But then you need to consider that the political goal, and I mentioned this vote that we had in Switzerland, we have the political pressure to deliver here. And this obviously takes precedence over conditions with regard to competition. So we need to balance these two things. But we are sort of a coalition of the willing in this whole exercise, and we'll do everything we can to make competition fair, but I think we will never make it fully fair. That's I think it's an important point that I'd like to stress. And thank you for the question on the suite. So this is a policy that is run by the Swiss Federal Office for Energy. The colleagues there do an excellent job. The focus there is more maybe on a little bit lower TRL technologies, their commercialization, making sure these technologies can be demonstrated in pilot plants. Our funding instrument envisaged to be complementary to that effort to make sure what comes out there can then be scaled up. If there is an issue with suite, I don't want to talk for my colleagues from the energy side, but given the fact that our policy needs to be complementary and has the goal to implementing the blending mandate and to getting the production up to meet the quota, we will need to be agile and see what other funding instruments are there, how they evolve, and then adjust what we do on the go. That's maybe what I can say on this.
Thank you so much to everybody. Our time is ending, but let's take just the last one question here from the audience, please.
Yes.
Very straight to the point, please.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the Swiss delegation for this invitation. My name is Patrizia Reisinger from Neste. Neste is was the world's first and is the world's biggest SAF producer. We are a Finnish company, but with global production also in Asia, amongst others. To give you a few numbers, we are currently investing 2.5 billion euros into expanding our SAF production capacity in Rotterdam to reach 2.2 million tons of SAF in 2027. And we are facing a difficult situation. We have an oversupplied market, we have less demand than anticipated, and we decided to cut 600 people, which is more than 10%. And now I have a question to the European Commission. You mentioned, which is great, you mentioned that you will support early movers. You mentioned you will support construction and provide price support. I very often heard eSAF. Little side note, we unfortunately have to cut our Power-to-X projects for the moment, or scale them a bit down due to our financial situation. So my question is, what kind of support are you going to provide to early movers who already have constructed the refineries, who are already supplying the market with a viable product? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eva, that's yours.
I think it's when we were referring to the support, I think we were quite clear that the focus should be where the market failure is, and there we see it's the eSAF. So, and as you say that you pose the developments there, because there's a sub target and we need to achieve. For the biofuel side, we see exactly. We are happy actually to see that we are on the track, but we would have hope as well that we see more airlines with the voluntary support. But we could hear from the room there are the concerns as well on the impact of the competitiveness and the impact. The SAF is more expensive, so it is important that we need to take all those different policy objectives into account and ensure that we have this stability and that we have this ramp up. For example, one of the initiatives, and we would really like to see airlines moving and adopting is this flight emission label, because that helps them to communicate, incentivize this voluntary uptake. We have as well the sustainable finance initiatives, taxonomy, SBTI. I don't know what does it's the full name, but this is basically this different schemes which goes towards net zero, Paris alignment, and the commitment. So there are many initiatives the airlines could demonstrate. We can explore as well how we can as well further support airlines in this voluntary, but we need to strike the right balance between mandated market and the voluntary market.
Thank you, Eva. This is the final word. So I have found the discussion very interesting, and I hope you will share this feeling. I have to sincerely thank Eddy Liégois, Ewa Oney, and Marcel Kägi for the time and their precious contribution to the Swiss breakfast. Without their takes on this topic, we couldn't have had a so meaningful exchange of views on the future of the aviation industry in Europe and Switzerland. I have to thank again Rita Adam, head of the Swiss mission to the EU, and all the fantastic team for the trust and the help provided. So many thanks to Michelangelo, Bernadette, and all the other colleagues of the mission. Of course, last but not least, a great thank you to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Switzerland. I hope to see you in the next Swiss breakfast. See you soon. Tschüss. Au revoir. Arrivederci.